White as snow, red as blood. Chapter 12. A curse to get rid of your enemy? I have many of those, madam, the well-fed wizard asked. Well, I'm looking for something more precise. Something that will only harm who I want it to, Queen Astrid explained, her face hidden underneath her hood. The wizard grinned and gave a jolly laugh. No one would think this man dealt in deadly crafts, not when he looked like a happy sea lion. Yet, Elijah knew about this particular man, and when they were younger, he also told her to stay far away from this wizard. However, she knew she couldn't ask Elijah or Benjamin to craft what she wanted. So, naturally, she had to go to the outskirts of the kingdom, where hermit wizards had taken residence. Oh, a challenge, but one I will happily overcome. I will need something of your enemy to successfully create such an enchantment, though. Queen Astrid pulled a thin vial out with silvery hair on the inside. While her comb hadn't done its job, it did give her a gift. She would have to come later with something that belonged to Rose Red. Is this sufficient? The wizard nodded, taking the vial from her before he stored it in a hidden pocket in his jacket. That is the best ingredient to work with. Any other requests? Maybe I could enhance the desire to partake of the curse? Make it irresistible? She wagged a finger. I like where this is headed, but it will cost me extra, won't it? That is the game, yes, he chuckled excitedly. Astrid sighed and threw down her first payment. And it's one I'm willing to play. Do your worst, and I shall pay whatever it costs me. Expect the rest when I come to receive the product. The man greedily took the coins and then asked before she could leave, and when will that be? By the end of the week or sooner. His eyes popped out of his head, and he scurried into the back room. The queen snickered and turned to leave. Before she went out, she adjusted her hood to cover her face more. Once she returned to the castle grounds, she breathed a sigh of relief and headed for her room. All she had to do now was convince some foolish courtier to deliver the product to Snow White. The girl was a stubborn cockroach who refused to die, and the queen assumed Rose Red would be the same. Astrid somehow needed to obtain something of Rose's as well, but first she'd see if this next attempt would eliminate one bug in her hair. Your Majesty! Queen Astrid jumped into the air, fearing she had been caught red-handed even though she had nothing incriminating on her. A guard was running towards her, and she relaxed when he bowed at her feet. We've been frantically searching for you. Prince Richard has not returned from his outing with Rose Red, and it's nearly midnight. He went somewhere with Rose Red? Astrid asked, blinking at the guard. Yes, Your Majesty. She thought for a moment and decided to not make a big deal of it. Well, of course he did. A nobleman's daughter was reported deathly sick, so I suspect Richard took Rose Red there himself. Just keep an eye out for them. The guard stood and saluted her, not daring to question the queen. She dismissed him with a wave of her hand and proceeded to her room. She quickly called a maid in to help her change into her nightgown. Once she was alone again, seated on her bed, she brought out her magic mirror, instructing it to show her Rose. She felt a little giddy when she saw the stupid girl fighting off a monstrous wolf. But before she could enjoy the show further, she heard a click at her doors. Her head shot up to see Elijah standing by them. She set the mirror face down on a pillow and smiled at him. Getting a little bold, are we? Elijah shook his head. He came forward but did not enter the area where she changed and slept. Instead, he remained by the open doorway that kept her sleeping quarters separate from where she entertained guests. No, I was just wondering why no one could find you when your son went missing. She sighed, sliding out of bed and bringing the mirror with her. Pulling on a robe, she walked over to him. Can I not dismiss my guards and enjoy a walk by myself? Besides, Richard went out with Rose Red. If anyone is in danger, it's that girl. Elijah frowned, his attention successfully drawn away from her late walk. What do you mean? Astrid sat down on her favorite love seat and patted the spot beside her. Let's just watch. That will clear things up a bit. Mirror, mirror, show me what sweet Rose Red has been up to tonight. The mirror did as she commanded, starting back to when Rose switched drinks with Richard. Elijah slowly took a seat, ingrained by the scene, while Astrid felt triumphant. They watched silently, Elijah tensing up as Rose fought off the wolf. Astrid was disappointed when Rose survived the night, somehow taming the wolf inside Richard. They stopped watching after that. Well, now they know Richard is still cursed, she complained, wishing she had plucked a hair from Rose's pillow before leaving to see the wizard. However, she wasn't aware the girl wouldn't be in her room then. Elijah stroked the back of Astrid's neck, brushing her hair off to one side. It's fine. He was going to find out eventually. I'll think of something to get us by until Richard's king, and then we can lay everything out on the table afterward. Astrid shook her head. Richard won't want to be king, not when he's cursed. You worry too much. The king is gone, and your sons love you. No matter who takes the throne, they won't abandon you. Elijah proceeded to kiss her neck. I'll come by in the morning. Get some sleep, Your Majesty. Once he left, she did as she was told, blowing out all her candles and bundling herself underneath her covers. However, sleep didn't come to her easily. She had thought Elijah would see how awful those girls were for tricking him, but he only expressed concern for Rose. No matter, in the morning, she would make Elijah watch Rose Red again. Once Richard was human, the girl was bound to say something accusatory. And the queen got what she wanted, but not the reaction. Going through an underground system of tunnels, Rose Red and Richard made it into the castle by dawn. Their first order of business was to change into a new set of clothes before meeting with the queen, so Rose parted ways with Richard, agreeing to meet up in 30 minutes. As Rose entered her room, a pair of arms threw themselves around her. If she hadn't seen Snow's unmistakable hair, Rose would have screamed. Instead, she let out a small gasp and patted her sister's head. Thank the Creator! Were you out all night? Snow wept. Yeah, it was a bit more complicated than I originally thought it would be, Rose explained, refraining from using the word dangerous. But I'm okay. Snow let go of Rose and sniffed. She looked her sister up and down, noting how drained Rose was, along with the small rips in her red cloak and dress. There was little she could do about it, and there was something she needed to share. The girls closed the door, and Rose quickly picked out a fresh dress, which happened to be her green uniform. The seamstress had brought it by the day before. Snow wasn't wearing hers and was, in fact, still in her white nightgown. I take it Richard's curse wasn't broken then? Snow asked, folding up Rose's cloak. Rose nodded before she slipped behind a folding screen, which had become a habit since their move to the castle. Yes, and it is definitely not the same curse Nathaniel was exposed to. Aside from changing into an animal, the similarities end there. We are going to approach the Queen about it this morning. Hopefully, that will clear the air. Snow took a breath. Actually, I think I already know what happened. At those words, Rose poked her head out from behind the screen. What do you mean? Did you hear something? More like saw. I was keeping my eye on Elijah while you were out. Rose, he drank the wolf's bane potion. That's why there are so many prepared. They aren't just for Richard, but for Elijah as well. Rose came out fully dressed and tapped her chin. She had her suspicions before, but this new information made it harder to deny. As I understand, some curses are passed down to the next generation, so do you think it's possible that Richard and Elijah are father and son? Snow finished. It's beginning to look that way. Rose groaned. She had one more truth to reveal to Richard, and this one would shatter his whole reality. It meant he was not the king's biological son or the true heir to the throne. The conversation between Chief Elijah and Queen Astrid was starting to make more sense to her. They didn't want to tell the truth until Richard had been crowned, and who knows if they would have even then. Other questions crowded her mind. Like if Elijah and the queen plotted the king's death. But if that was the case, wouldn't it have benefited the two lovers to kill the king sooner? And what about Nathaniel? He resembled the late king more than Elijah, so was there no intention of harming the king? Then there was the issue with Framsey. It wasn't strange for royals to hire wizards anymore, but something unsettling occurred between Framsey and the queen. For once in her life, Rose wished she had invited the centaur over for tea. Man, if only we knew more about Framsey, Rose said without giving Snow any context to her string of thought, so she added, everything must connect somehow. Richard and Nathaniel's curses aren't the same, but there's something we're missing. Then let's continue playing with fire, Snow stated. Rose's mouth dropped. Are you being serious? After everything we've learned, you, of all people, still want to move forward? Chief Elijah and Queen Astrid had an affair under the king's nose and possibly killed him to be together, and you want to dig further? Snow set the folded cloak on Rose's bed. Well, I didn't want to, remember? But Nathaniel and Richard deserve the truth, and I can't keep running from danger. Besides, I know exactly who I can ask about Framsey and clarifications on Richard's condition. Okay, but take Nathaniel with you. Richard and I will talk to the queen as planned. Are you going to tell him about Elijah? Snow asked as they neared the doors. Rose shook her head. I don't know. Ideally, the queen would share that with him, but I don't think she will. For now, we'll have to tread cautiously around her and Chief Elijah since we only have bits of their history. The girls walked into the hall. Snow hugged her sister, telling her to be safe. Before doing a quick breath exercise, Rose watched as Snow entered her bedroom. Rose was overwhelmed beyond belief, and meeting with the queen became 10 times more stressful than it had been a month before. A bit calmer, she marched along the corridor until she came across Richard. He smiled broadly at her, and she knew she could not keep the information from him like she had done before. His beaming smile faded when he recognized the furrow between her brows. He reached for her, and she took his hand, gratefully squeezing it a little. Richard, she began, then she glanced around the hall and thought better of it. She stepped closer, putting one hand on the back of his neck. He leaned down so her mouth was right at his ear. He couldn't help the butterflies in his stomach as her breath tickled his skin, though he knew the matter was serious. I talked with Snow just now. She saw Elijah drink the potion meant for you after I left last night. That got his attention, but he didn't let Rose back away from him. He held her hand tighter, interlocking their fingers while his other hand hugged her lower back. When she first told him about his mother's relationship with Elijah, he denied the possibility of Elijah being his father. Richard respected Elijah, his mother, and the king, who he had called father. He was happy his mother fell in love again, but he hated the idea that she wasn't faithful to her husband. Yet, Richard wanted to live in a delusion. You think he's my father, he finally stated. Rose nodded, her cheek brushing his. Yes. If he was cursed before you, he likely passed it down. There could be another explanation, like the two of you getting cursed at the same time, but you would remember something like that, right? Richard sighed and rested his forehead on her shoulder. You would think unless I was a baby. But I remember when the transformation started. It was a year after Nathaniel left, and Framsey's potion was the only explanation that made sense to me. I guess this means we have one more question for my mother. Are you ready to ask them? He lifted his head, releasing his hold on her back but keeping his hand in hers. I can't move forward without knowing the truth. I will not take the crown when Nathaniel is the rightful heir, nor will I plague the throne with a generational curse. Rose kissed him, falling faster for him than she intended. Then let's face it together. Hand in hand, they walked the rest of the way to the Queen's bedroom. Before they could even knock, they heard shouting from behind the double doors. They recognized the voices as Elijah and Queen Astrid, the very two people they wanted to talk to. When Richard attempted to tap a knuckle on the wood, the door flew open, and Elijah bitterly exclaimed, "Oh, and here they are, Astrid. Isn't your mirror handy?" Astrid stood in her nightgown and robes next to a circular table in the middle of the room. She held her golden hand mirror in her hand, which she held up for Elijah's benefit. Rose immediately noticed that the image in the mirror wasn't reflecting as it should. Instead, it showed the back of her and Richard's heads before it fogged over and worked as predicted. Rose's eyes shot up to the Queen as the woman quickly set the mirror face down on the table. She tossed her blonde curls over her shoulder and smacked a smile on her face. Elijah did no such thing, opening the door wide, followed by the second. He would not pretend any longer. "Come in. We're already aware of what happened and what you know," Elijah said, closing and locking the door as soon as the young couple was inside. Queen Astrid clicked her tongue, her pleasant demeanor fading. For the first time, Rose got a look at the real Astrid. The desperate woman controlled by fear, not the well-mannered, beautiful queen. "Fine, ruin everything we've worked for, Elijah." "What do I care?" she huffed. Elijah gave her a moment of his attention before addressing Richard. "You are cursed because of me, not Framsey." "I'm sorry." Rose gently touched Richard's forearm, leaning into him a bit more. Richard felt her touch, but his mind was swimming. Despite the multitude of thoughts, he couldn't speak, so Rose spoke for him. "You'll have to explain a little more, Chief." Astrid shot Rose a distasteful look, hating her and Snow more than ever. However, she remained quiet. She had a plan, and while she hoped last night would have brought Elijah to her side, it didn't matter. Still, she couldn't believe that showing Elijah that Rose and Snow tricked him wasn't enough to convince him of how dangerous they were. "I am not just a herbalist, but a wizard as well. When I was young, I studied the centaur curse and how they came to be. Then, I also heard how certain witches had the power to transform back and forth between human and animal. I wanted to create a formula allowing me to do the same. Many wizards have crafted similar potions, but the result was either permanent or a one-time bargain that lasted an hour or two. Mine would top those both, and I believed even centaurs would appreciate such a potion. They could maintain their speed and strength but also have better relations with humans." "Let me guess, it went terribly wrong," Rose stated. Elijah scratched the back of his head, jostling his long hair. "Yes, in more ways than one. I successfully crafted potions to make me a wolf, but none lasted long, nor could I switch between forms. I finally decided to inject it directly into my blood. It worked for a day or two, but it changed after the first full moon hit. I lost control when I became a wolf, and I killed my family's livestock. They, of course, disowned me, and Astrid was the only person that stayed. We were childhood friends, and she believed I would do great things." All eyes drifted over to Astrid, who bristled. However, when she met Elijah's eyes, she relaxed, seeing his love for her. "And if you loved each other, why did you marry the king?" Richard asked, finally regaining his voice. He wanted to hear from his mother. Astrid flinched and turned away from the group to stare out a slit between the green curtains in front of a large window. We thought it was the best way to secure the materials Elijah needed. Not to mention my parents practically sold me to the king. Once I was crowned, I recommended Elijah to the original chief herbalist. After that, Elijah was able to freely use funds I sent their way, especially when Elijah worked his way to the top. After that, we planned to wait until the king died to officially get married. We thought it wouldn't be long, but he lived longer than expected. Giving him an heir was always part of the plan, but you weren't what we had in mind, Richard. She turned to face her son, her lips curved downward. It was hard to admit how afraid she had been during Richard's birth. When she first found out, she did not know whose child she was giving birth to. I was already pregnant with you when I married the king. I didn't know I was, but I sent word to Elijah immediately so we could find out. A potion confirmed my worst fear, so we prepared the best we could, thinking it wouldn't be so bad if we could get you on the throne. It just meant holding on to more secrets, though. And this one would most certainly result in our deaths. Thankfully, the king didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. I rarely contacted Elijah in person after that, even when you started to suffer from the curse. I kept looking forward to the day I could finally be with him once you took the throne. Richard gritted his teeth, taking a step, but Rose grounded him where he was. I don't know what's worse, being a mistake or being used as a pawn in your little game. Tears flared in Astrid's eyes. It was the best option we had. My parents would have never let me marry Elijah. They're the ones who tossed me in front of the king and Elijah, and I knew it would benefit us in the long run if I married him. It has. I have people who adore me, plenty of food, dresses, and anything I could ask for. And Elijah quickly found a cure so he wouldn't harm anyone while searching for a permanent solution for you both. It also gave him a fulfilling job and place to stay, so I'm sorry we lied to you to make you feel better. A silence spread across the room, and Rose was afraid to breathe. She understood Astrid and Elijah's actions, especially since they reminded her of her parents. Yet, her parents hadn't lied to her about her birth or her health or placed her in a high-ranking position she didn't deserve. Richard had a right to be furious and disappointed. I'll abdicate the throne. Nathaniel will rule as he was meant to, Richard announced. Astrid choked. Richard, you can't do that. The people can think what they want. And don't lose your head because I don't plan to tell anyone my reasons until you and Elijah are good and dead. So you can still live out your dream, and I can sleep at night. Sounds reasonable, Elijah spoke. Astrid rushed over to him, grasping his uniform in a frenzy, her face losing its color. Reasonable. Elijah, Nathaniel won't accept the throne without an explanation. Mother, you've always thought little of Nathaniel, but he deserves the truth as much as me. And you forget how much he loves you even if your love for him hardly measures up. Richard narrowed his eyes. Which reminds me, what's the deal with Framsey? Don't tell me you had my brother cursed to be rid of him. Astrid let out a horrified gasp. She let go of Elijah and placed a hand on her heart. I would never purposely harm my boys. He may be the king's son, but I love him. Framsey just got too close to the truth. He found out Elijah was a wizard and started to study animal transformation. That's why I ordered his arrest. I did not hire him to curse your brother. All true, but Astrid would keep the rest tucked away. The parts that Elijah didn't know about. The purpose of Framsey entering the castle in the first place. Then, if you love him, you'll tell him. I'll even do it for you, Richard said, turning himself and Rose to the doors. Then, over his shoulder, he added, oh, and don't worry about my marriage prospects. Consider Rose as my intended from here on. Rose nearly collapsed from holding her breath for so long. She held it together until they were out of the room, then gasped. It had been suffocating in there, and she had no doubt the queen would hold a grudge against the two girls who revealed a deep secret. There had been too much fear in the queen's eyes for her to let it go so quickly.